Eleanor Whitman stood at her kitchen window, watching her 9-year-old grandson Marcus through the lace curtains. The boy sat behind the wheel of an old pickup truck in the garage, his small hands gripping the steering wheel with intense concentration. His lips moved silently as he practiced shifting gears, his feet barely reaching the pedals, even with the wooden blocks his father had installed months ago. "That child spends more time in that truck than he does playing with toys," Eleanor muttered to herself, adjusting her reading glasses. She had been watching this routine for weeks now, and her concern grew with each passing day. Marcus had always been different from other children his age. While his classmates played video games or rode bicycles, he studied car manuals and watched driving instruction videos on his tablet. His bedroom walls were covered with pictures of different vehicles, from pickup trucks to 18-wheelers. His bookshelf held driver's education handbooks instead of children's books. The whole situation started 6 months earlier when Marcus's father, David, had brought home the old 1995 Ford pickup truck. David worked as a mechanic at the local garage and had gotten the truck for practically nothing. It needed major engine work, but David planned to restore it as a weekend project. Marcus had been fascinated from the moment he saw the truck. He asked endless questions about how everything worked. David, pleased to see his son showing interest in something practical, began explaining the basics of driving. What started as innocent father-son bonding time had evolved into something that worried Eleanor deeply. "Mom, you're being dramatic," David had told her when she first expressed concern. "He's just curious about how things work. It's better than him sitting in front of a screen all day like most kids." But Eleanor saw something different in her grandson's behavior. This wasn't simple curiosity. Marcus approached driving with the intensity of someone much older, someone carrying responsibilities that no 9-year-old should have to bear. Every afternoon after school, Marcus would drop his backpack by the front door and head straight to the garage. He had developed a systematic routine. First, he would walk around the truck, checking the tires and looking under the hood. Then he would climb into the driver's seat and begin his practice session. Eleanor had tried talking to Marcus about his unusual hobby several times, but the conversations never went well. The boy would become defensive and explain that he needed to learn to drive properly. When she asked why it was so important, Marcus would get quiet and change the subject. "Mrs. Whitman, is everything all right with Marcus?" His teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had called to ask the previous week. "He seems distracted in class lately. He draws pictures of cars during lessons and talks about driving techniques during recess." Eleanor had assured the teacher that everything was fine, but privately she knew it wasn't. Something was driving her grandson to spend hours practicing skills he wouldn't need for 7 more years. The family dynamics had become complicated since Marcus's mother, Sarah, had left 2 years earlier. David worked long hours to support them, and Eleanor helped care for Marcus after school and on weekends. The boy had adjusted well to his parents' divorce, or so everyone thought. Eleanor remembered the day Sarah had packed her belongings and moved to California for a new job. Marcus had stood in the driveway, watching his mother load boxes into her car. He had been unusually quiet that day, asking detailed questions about how long it would take to drive to California and what route she would use. "Grandma, do you think Mom would come back if I could drive to get her?" Marcus had asked that evening. The question had broken Eleanor's heart, but she had gently explained that his mother's decision to move had nothing to do with him. Now, watching Marcus in the garage, Eleanor wondered if his obsession with driving was connected to that conversation. Perhaps he believed that if he could drive, he could somehow fix the problems in his family. David arrived home from work just as Eleanor was preparing dinner. She heard him greeting Marcus in the garage, their voices mixing with the sound of the truck's engine as David tested some repair he had made. "How long has he been out there today?" David asked as he washed his hands at the kitchen sink. "Since 3:30, Eleanor replied, stirring the pot of soup on the stove. "David, we need to talk about this driving business. It's getting out of hand." David dried his hands and leaned against the counter. "Mom, he's learning valuable skills. I wish I had been that focused when I was his age." "He's 9 years old," Eleanor said firmly. 9-year-old boys should be playing baseball or building tree houses, not spending 3 hours a day practicing driving. Times are different now, David argued. Kids mature faster. Marcus is responsible for his age. Eleanor turned to face her son, her expression serious. David, when was the last time Marcus had a friend over to play? When was the last time he asked to go to the park or wanted to watch cartoons? David paused, considering the questions. He's always been independent. Even when Sarah was here, he preferred quiet activities. This isn't about being independent, Eleanor said. Yesterday, I found him reading a book about long-distance driving. He had pages marked about driving from here to California. The revelation seemed to surprise David. He glanced toward the garage, where they could hear Marcus talking to himself as he practiced parallel parking maneuvers in the stationary truck. You think this is about Sarah? David asked quietly. I think it might be about more than just Sarah, Eleanor replied. I think he's trying to solve problems that aren't his to solve. That evening at dinner, Eleanor watched Marcus carefully. The boy ate mechanically while describing various driving techniques he had learned from videos. He talked about proper following distances, how to handle different weather conditions, and the importance of regular vehicle maintenance. Marcus, honey, Eleanor interrupted gently. What do you want to be when you grow up? A driver, Marcus answered without hesitation. I want to drive trucks or maybe work for a delivery company. Something where I can drive long distances. That's interesting, Eleanor said. But, you have many years before you need to worry about driving, right? You could explore other interests too. Marcus looked up from his plate, his young face serious beyond his years. Grandma, what if something happens and I need to drive? What if there's an emergency and Dad can't drive and you can't drive? Someone has to be ready. The question revealed the depth of anxiety that had been driving Marcus's behavior. Eleanor and David exchanged glances across the table, both beginning to understand that their assumption about Marcus's motivation had been wrong. What kind of emergency are you worried about? David asked gently. Marcus hesitated, then spoke in a rush. What if Mom gets sick in California and needs help? What if you get hurt at work? What if Grandma needs to go to the hospital? I need to be able to help. I need to be able to drive when people need me to. The adult responsibilities that Marcus had placed on his own shoulders became clear in that moment. Somehow, this 9-year-old boy had decided that learning to drive was the solution to protecting the people he loved from potential disasters. Eleanor felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized how much pressure her grandson had been carrying. His hours of practice weren't about cars or driving for the sake of driving. They were about preparing himself to be the family's backup plan, the person who could step in when others couldn't. After dinner, David and Eleanor sat on the front porch while Marcus continued his evening practice session in the garage. The sound of him adjusting mirrors and checking gauges drifted across the yard. We have to do something, Eleanor said. This level of worry isn't healthy for a child his age. David nodded slowly. I had no idea he was thinking about all those scenarios. I thought he just liked cars. He's trying to grow up too fast, Eleanor observed. He's taking on responsibilities that belong to adults. As the evening grew darker, Marcus finally emerged from the garage. He walked toward the house with the same focused expression he wore during his driving practice. Eleanor noticed that he moved differently than other children his age, with a purposefulness that seemed to weigh him down. Good practice session? David asked as Marcus joined them on the porch. I'm getting better at backing up, Marcus reported. I practiced emergency stops too. Did you know that it takes longer to stop on wet roads? I've been studying about that. Eleanor patted the porch step beside her. Come sit with Grandma for a minute. Marcus settled next to Eleanor, and she wrapped her arm around his small shoulders. Marcus, there are many different ways to help people. Driving is just one of them. But it's an important one, Marcus insisted. What if someone needs to get somewhere fast? Well, Eleanor said thoughtfully, there are also doctors who help people, and teachers who help children learn, and firefighters who help in emergencies. There are many people whose job it is to help when there are problems. Marcus considered this information seriously. But what if they're not around when something happens? Eleanor recognized that Marcus's fears ran deeper than they had realized. His driving practice was a symptom of a broader anxiety about being unable to protect the people he cared about. Marcus, David said, You know that it's not your job to worry about taking care of the grown-ups, right? That's our job. Your job is to be 9 years old and learn about the world and have fun. But I want to be ready, Marcus said quietly. I want to be able to help. Eleanor hugged him closer. And that's a beautiful thing about you, sweetheart. You have a caring heart. But there are age-appropriate ways to help people. You don't have to carry the weight of adult problems. As they sat together on the porch, Eleanor began to formulate a plan. Marcus's driving obsession was a problem, but it was also an opportunity. If they could channel his desire to help people in healthier directions, they might be able to ease his anxiety while encouraging his natural caring instincts. The first step will be helping Marcus understand that his worth wasn't tied to his ability to solve adult problems. The second step would be finding ways for him to feel helpful and competent that were appropriate for his age. Eleanor looked at her grandson's profile in the porch light, seeing both the child he was and the caring person he was becoming. Tomorrow, she decided, they would start working together to help Marcus find better ways to channel his desire to help others. The next morning, Eleanor woke early and prepared a special breakfast for Marcus. She had spent most of the night thinking about their conversation on the porch, and she had developed a plan to help redirect his energy into more appropriate activities. When Marcus came downstairs, he was already dressed and ready for school, but Eleanor noticed he kept glancing toward the garage through the kitchen window. "Marcus, I have an idea," Eleanor said as she placed a plate of pancakes in front of him. "What if we found some ways for you to help people that don't require waiting until you're old enough to drive?" Marcus looked up from his breakfast, his expression cautious but interested. "What kind of ways?" "Well," Eleanor said, settling into the chair across from him, "I was thinking about what you said last night. You want to be ready to help when people need you. But there are lots of ways to help that you could start doing right now." She had prepared a mental list during her sleepless night. For example, you could learn first aid. That's a skill that helps people in emergencies, and you're old enough to learn the basics. Marcus's eyes brightened slightly. "Like what paramedics do." "Exactly like what paramedics do," Eleanor confirmed. "And you could also learn about emergency preparedness. Like having emergency supplies ready and knowing what to do in different situations." "That sounds useful," Marcus admitted, though Eleanor could tell he was still thinking about driving. "The thing is," Eleanor continued carefully, "these are skills that complement driving. Even adults who are excellent drivers need to know these other things too. So learning them now would actually make you better prepared for when you are old enough to drive." This reasoning seemed to resonate with Marcus. Eleanor could see him processing the logic of her suggestion. "Could I still practice driving sometimes?" he asked. Eleanor had anticipated this question. "We can talk about that with your father. But maybe we could balance the driving practice with these other skills. What do you think?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Can we start today?" "Actually," Eleanor said, "I already called Mrs. Rodriguez at your school. She told me that the school is starting a safety patrol program next month. Students help younger children cross streets safely and learn about pedestrian safety." The information caught Marcus's attention immediately. "Could I be in the safety patrol?" "She said she thinks you'd be perfect for it," Eleanor replied truthfully. Mrs. Rodriguez had indeed been enthusiastic about the idea when Eleanor called her early that morning. And Eleanor added, "I also found out that the local fire station offers junior firefighter programs for kids your age. They teach emergency preparedness and basic safety skills." Marcus finished his pancakes quickly, his mind clearly working through these new possibilities. "When could I start the firefighter program?" "This Saturday," Eleanor said. "But first, we need to talk with your father about balancing these activities with your driving practice." That evening, the family held what Eleanor privately thought of as their first real family meeting. David arrived home from work to find Eleanor and Marcus sitting at the dining room table with several pamphlets and a notebook spread between them. "What's all this?" David asked, though his tone suggested he suspected it was related to their conversation the previous evening. "Marcus, and I have been researching ways he can start helping people right now," Eleanor explained. "We found some programs that teach emergency skills for kids his age." Marcus launched into an explanation of everything they had learned. He talked about the school safety patrol, the junior firefighter program, and the first aid classes Eleanor had found at the community center. David listened carefully, and Eleanor could see him recognizing the wisdom of redirecting Marcus's energy into age-appropriate activities. These sound like great programs, Marcus. But what about your driving practice? Marcus glanced at Eleanor, then back at his father. Grandma says these skills will make me a better driver when I'm old enough. She says even good drivers need to know emergency skills. That's absolutely true, David agreed. In fact, some of the best drivers I know are people who understand emergency preparedness and safety procedures. So could I do both? Marcus asked hopefully. David considered the question. How about this? What if we limited the driving practice to weekends, and you use your after-school time for these other activities? That way you're still learning about vehicles, but you're also developing other helpful skills. Marcus thought about this compromise seriously. Eleanor could see him weighing the pros and cons in his methodical way. Could I still practice emergency driving techniques on weekends? He asked. What do you mean by emergency driving techniques? David asked. Marcus's answer revealed just how deeply he had been thinking about emergency scenarios, like how to drive safely to a hospital quickly, or how to handle the car if something breaks while you're driving. Eleanor and David exchanged glances. Marcus's focus on emergency situations was more intense than they had realized. Marcus, Eleanor said gently, it sounds like you spent a lot of time worrying about emergencies. Is there something specific that you're worried might happen? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands folded on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. What if something happens to you and Dad, and there's no one to take care of me? What if Mom gets hurt in California and needs help? What if I can't reach anyone when something bad happens? The depth of his anxiety became clear in those questions. Marcus wasn't just worried about being helpful. He was worried about being completely alone and powerless. David moved his chair closer to Marcus. Son, do you worry about these things a lot? Marcus nodded. Especially at night. I think about all the things that could go wrong and how I wouldn't be able to help or fix them. Eleanor felt her heart break a little more. Sweetheart, it's normal for children to worry sometimes, but it sounds like you're worrying about things that probably won't happen and that you wouldn't be responsible for even if they did. But what if they do happen? Marcus persisted. Well, David said thoughtfully, that's where emergency planning comes in. But the planning should be done by adults, and kids should know what to do, but not feel responsible for handling everything. Eleanor had an idea. Marcus, what if we work together to make an emergency plan for our family? That way you'd know exactly what to do in different situations, but you wouldn't have to worry about figuring it all out by yourself. This suggestion seemed to relieve some of Marcus's anxiety. Like a real emergency plan? Exactly like a real emergency plan, Eleanor confirmed. We'd include contact information for important people, and we'd talk about what to do in different situations. But the plan would be something all three of us created together. Over the next hour, they worked on creating their family emergency plan. Marcus contributed ideas, but Eleanor and David made sure he understood that the adults were responsible for the major decisions and actions. They discussed everything from fire safety to medical emergencies to natural disasters. For each scenario, they identified what Marcus's role would be, and it was always age-appropriate. Call 911, follow the adult's instructions, know where to meet the family if they had to leave the house. See, Eleanor explained, in every emergency situation, there are specific people whose job it is to help. Police officers, firefighters, doctors, paramedics. Your job as a kid is to know how to contact these helpers and how to stay safe until they arrive. Marcus seemed to understand this concept, though Eleanor could tell he was still processing the idea that he didn't need to be responsible for solving adult problems. The Junior Firefighter program will teach you more about how emergency services work, David added. You'll learn about the whole system of people who are trained to help in different situations. And the safety patrol at school will teach you how to help other kids stay safe, Eleanor added. That's a perfect way to use your caring nature to help people right now. As they finished their emergency planning session, Marcus seemed more relaxed than Eleanor had seen him in months. Having a concrete plan seemed to ease his anxiety about unknown scenarios. "Can we still work on the truck sometimes?" Marcus asked his father. "Absolutely," David replied. "But maybe we can focus more on the mechanical aspects and less on the emergency driving scenarios. I could teach you about how engines work and basic car maintenance." "That would be good," Marcus agreed. "I want to understand how everything works." Eleanor smiled at this response. Marcus's curiosity about how things worked was natural and healthy. It was the anxiety about emergency situations that needed to be addressed. That night, Eleanor tucked Marcus into bed and noticed that his room looked different. Instead of the car manuals on his nightstand, he had placed a pamphlet about the junior firefighter program and his notebook from their emergency planning session. "Grandma," Marcus said as she turned off his light, "do you think I'll be good at helping people?" "I think you'll be wonderful at helping people," Eleanor replied truthfully. "You have a caring heart and a careful mind. Those are exactly the qualities that good helpers have. Even if I'm not old enough to drive yet, especially because you're learning these other skills first," Eleanor said. "By the time you are old enough to drive, you'll understand so much about safety and emergency procedures that you'll be an even better driver." Marcus smiled in the darkness. "I like that idea." As Eleanor closed his bedroom door, she felt hopeful for the first time in months. Marcus was beginning to understand that there were many ways to be helpful and prepared, and that he didn't have to carry the burden of adult responsibilities on his 9-year-old shoulders. The next few days brought positive changes. Marcus still visited the garage after school, but instead of spending hours practicing driving, he helped David with mechanical work on the truck while they talked about how different systems in the car worked. Eleanor enrolled Marcus in the junior firefighter program and the first aid classes. She also spoke with Mrs. Rodriguez about Marcus joining the school safety patrol. Most importantly, Marcus began sleeping better. The emergency plan they had created seemed to have eased his nighttime worries about worst-case scenarios. Eleanor realized that Marcus's driving obsession had been a symptom of deeper anxiety, and addressing that anxiety was helping him find healthier ways to channel his desire to help others. Saturday morning arrived with Marcus awake before dawn, excited about his first day in the junior firefighter program. Eleanor found him in the kitchen at 6 o'clock, already dressed and eating cereal while reading the pamphlet for the third time. "The program doesn't start until 9, Eleanor reminded him gently. "You have plenty of time." "I want to be ready," Marcus replied, and Eleanor recognized the familiar intensity in his voice. However, this time it seemed focused on something positive rather than driven by anxiety. David joined them for breakfast, and Eleanor was pleased to see that their new routine was working well. Instead of rushing to the garage for driving practice, Marcus spent time talking with his father about the mechanical work they planned to do on the truck later. "After your firefighter program, we could work on checking the brake pads," David suggested. "That's an important safety feature to understand." "Do firefighters need to know about car maintenance?" Marcus asked. "Absolutely," David replied. "Firefighters need to understand all kinds of mechanical systems. Their trucks have complicated equipment that needs regular maintenance." Eleanor drove Marcus to the fire station, and she was impressed by how professional and organized the program appeared. Captain Martinez, who ran the junior firefighter program, greeted them warmly. "You must be Marcus," Captain Martinez said, shaking hand with the boy. "I understand you're interested in emergency preparedness." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied politely. "I want to learn how to help people safely." Eleanor noticed how Marcus phrased his goal differently now. Instead of saying he wanted to be ready for emergencies, he was talking about learning proper procedures for helping others. The fire station was filled with 8 other children, ranging in age from 8 to 12. Eleanor was relieved to see that Marcus wouldn't be the only young participant. "Today we're going to learn about fire safety," Captain Martinez announced. "Who knows the most important rule about fires?" A girl named Sarah raised her hand. "Don't try to fight big fires yourself. Call the firefighters." "Exactly right," Captain Martinez confirmed. "Our job as junior firefighters is not to fight fires. Our job is to prevent fires recognize dangerous situations, and know how to get help from trained professionals. Eleanor could see Marcus listening intently to this explanation. The captain was reinforcing the same message they had been trying to teach Marcus at home. Children should learn safety skills and know how to get help, but they shouldn't try to handle adult responsibilities. The program was structured perfectly for children Marcus's age. They learned about smoke detectors, fire escape plans, and basic first aid. But everything was taught within the context of getting help from trained adults. Marcus, you seem to know a lot about emergency procedures already, Captain Martinez observed during a break. Have you been studying this on your own? I've been reading about emergencies and safety, Marcus admitted. I want to be prepared to help my family if something happens. Captain Martinez nodded thoughtfully. That's commendable, but remember that the best way to help your family is to follow safety procedures and call for professional help when needed. Adults have years of training for emergency situations. After the program, Marcus was bubbling with excitement as they drove home. Did you know that firefighters practice their skills every single day? Captain Martinez said that even experienced firefighters keep learning new things. That's interesting, Eleanor replied. It sounds like helping people safely requires ongoing education. And teamwork, Marcus added. Captain Martinez said that firefighters work in teams because emergencies are too complicated for one person to handle alone. Eleanor smiled at this observation. Marcus was beginning to understand that effective emergency response involved trained professionals working together, not individuals trying to handle everything by themselves. When they arrived home, David was working in the garage, and Marcus eagerly shared everything he had learned. Eleanor listened as Marcus explained fire safety procedures with the same enthusiasm he had previously reserved for driving techniques. The coolest part was when Captain Martinez showed us the equipment on the fire truck. Marcus said, "There's so many different tools for different kinds of emergencies." He said it takes firefighters months to learn how to use everything properly. Sounds like there's a lot more to emergency response than just knowing how to drive quickly, David observed. Way more, Marcus agreed. And Captain Martinez said that driving the fire truck is actually one of the hardest parts because you have to be really careful not to cause accidents while you're responding to emergencies. Eleanor and David exchanged pleased glances. Marcus was discovering that emergency response was much more complex than he had originally understood. That afternoon, Marcus helped David work on the truck, but their conversation had shifted. Instead of discussing emergency driving scenarios, Marcus asked questions about how the various safety systems in the truck worked. Why do the brake lights come on automatically when you press the brake pedal? Marcus asked. David explained how the electrical system connected to the brake pedal, and Marcus listened with the same focused attention he had given to driving techniques. So, the car is designed to communicate with other drivers about what you're doing, Marcus realized. Exactly, David confirmed. Good driving is mostly about communicating clearly with other drivers and following predictable patterns. Eleanor was pleased to see that Marcus was developing a more nuanced understanding of vehicle operation that focused on cooperation and communication rather than emergency scenarios. Monday brought Marcus's first day as a member of the school safety patrol. Mrs. Rodriguez had arranged for him to partner with Jessica, a fifth grader who had been on the safety patrol for 2 years. The most important thing, Jessica explained as they walked to their assigned corner, is to make sure the little kids follow the rules. They get excited and sometimes forget to look both ways. Marcus took his responsibilities seriously, but Eleanor was relieved to see that his role was clearly defined and age-appropriate. He helped younger children remember to wait for the crossing guard signal and stay within the designated crosswalk lines. How was your first day on safety patrol? Eleanor asked when Marcus arrived home from school. Really good, Marcus replied. I helped Tommy Henderson remember to wait for the signal, and I showed Emma Martinez where to stand while waiting to cross. Eleanor noticed that Marcus was talking about helping specific children with specific tasks, rather than worrying about hypothetical emergency situations. Did anything challenging happen? She asked. Not really, Marcus said. Jessica says most days are pretty routine. She told me that the crossing guard handles any serious problems that come up. Again, Eleanor was pleased to hear Marcus recognizing that there were adults in charge of handling major issues. That evening, the family had their weekly check-in meeting, a new tradition Eleanor had suggested to help them stay connected about Marcus's activities and feelings. "How are you feeling about all your new activities?" David asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I liked a lot. I feel like I'm learning useful things, and I get to help people in real ways instead of just practicing for someday." "What's your favorite part?" Eleanor asked. "I like the junior firefighter program because Captain Martinez explains how everything works. And I like safety patrol because I can see that I'm actually helping kids stay safe right now." Eleanor was thrilled to hear Marcus talking about immediate, concrete ways to help people rather than distant, hypothetical scenarios. "Are you still interested in the driving practice?" David asked. "Yes, but not as much as before," Marcus admitted. "I want to learn about it, but I'm not worried about it the same way I was before." "What changed?" Eleanor asked curiously. Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "I guess I realized that there are lots of people whose job it is to handle emergencies. And there are lots of ways to help people that I can do right now. I don't have to wait until I'm old enough to drive to be useful." Eleanor felt tears of relief forming in her eyes. Marcus had articulated exactly what they had been hoping he would understand. "Plus," Marcus continued, "Captain Martinez said that the best emergency responders are people who understand how to work as part of a team. He said individual heroes usually make things worse because they don't coordinate with other responders." This insight showed that Marcus was developing a more mature understanding of how emergency systems actually worked. "So what are your goals now?" David asked. "I want to be really good at the safety patrol," Marcus said. "And I want to learn everything I can in the junior firefighter program. And I want to take the first aid classes Grandma found so I can help if someone gets hurt at school." "Those sound like excellent goals," Eleanor agreed. "Very practical and helpful. And I still want to learn about cars and trucks," Marcus added. "But more about how they work and how to take care of them, not just how to drive them in emergencies." As they finished their family meeting, Eleanor reflected on how much had changed in just 1 week. Marcus still had the same caring heart and desire to help others, but he had found healthier and more appropriate ways to channel those feelings. The key had been showing Marcus that there were immediate, concrete ways for him to be helpful, while also teaching him about the broader systems of trained professionals who handle major emergencies. That night, as Eleanor tucked Marcus into bed, she noticed that his room had continued to evolve. The car manuals were now mixed with books about fire safety and a first aid handbook from the community center. "Grandma," Marcus said as she turned off his light, "I'm glad we figured out better ways for me to help people." "Me too, sweetheart," Eleanor replied. "You're going to make a wonderful helper in all kinds of ways. And I'm not as worried about bad things happening anymore," Marcus added. "I know there are people whose job it is to handle those things, and I know what my job is too." Eleanor kissed his forehead, feeling grateful that they had been able to help Marcus find peace while still nurturing his natural desire to care for others. 3 weeks into Marcus's new routine, Eleanor received an unexpected phone call that would test everything they had been working toward. David had been injured in a workplace accident and was being taken to the hospital. Eleanor felt her stomach drop as she listened to David's supervisor explain that a hydraulic lift had malfunctioned, pinning David's leg. He was conscious and stable, but would need surgery and several weeks of recovery time. Marcus was at school when the call came, and Eleanor had to make quick decisions about how to handle the situation. Her first instinct was to pick Marcus up from school immediately, but she realized this might trigger exactly the kind of anxiety they had been working to address. Instead, Eleanor called the school and arranged to speak with Mrs. Rodriguez. She explained the situation and asked if Marcus could stay after school for the extended care program while she went to the hospital. "I'll tell Marcus that his father had an accident, but is going to be fine," Mrs. Rodriguez offered. "I can let him know you're at the hospital taking care of everything, and that you'll pick him up this evening with more information." Eleanor agreed to this plan, grateful for Mrs. Rodriguez's understanding of Marcus's particular concerns. At the hospital, Eleanor found David alert, but clearly in pain. The doctors explained that he would need surgery to repair torn ligaments in his leg, followed by several weeks of physical therapy. How am I going to tell Marcus? David asked, worry evident in his voice despite his own injury. He's going to think this confirms all his worst fears about emergencies. Eleanor had been thinking about the same concern. Actually, I think this might be an opportunity to show him how emergency systems are supposed to work. You were hurt, trained medical professionals took care of you, and the situation is under control. David considered this perspective. You think he'll see it that way? If we handle it right, Eleanor replied. We need to emphasize that the system worked exactly like it's supposed to. You got hurt, your coworkers called for help, the paramedics came, and now the doctors are taking care of you. When Eleanor picked Marcus up from school that evening, she was prepared for his reaction. Marcus's face was pale with worry, and she could see him struggling to process the information Mrs. Rodriguez had given him. Is Dad really okay? Marcus asked immediately. He's going to be fine, Eleanor assured him. He hurt his leg at work, and the doctors are going to fix it. It's exactly the kind of situation where the emergency system works the way it's supposed to. On the drive home, Eleanor explained what had happened in terms that emphasized the positive aspects of the situation. David's co-workers had responded correctly, the paramedics had arrived quickly, and the doctors at the hospital had everything under control. Can I see him? Marcus asked. Tomorrow after school, Eleanor promised. The doctor said he needs to rest tonight after his surgery, but visitors will be good for him starting tomorrow. At home, Marcus immediately wanted to know what they should do to help. Eleanor could see his mind starting to race toward the emergency scenarios he had practiced so many times. Marcus, she said gently, do you remember what we learned about emergency response? What's the most important thing when someone gets hurt? Marcus recited the lesson he had learned in the junior firefighter program. Make sure they get help from trained professionals. Right, Eleanor confirmed. And that's exactly what happened. Dad got help from paramedics and doctors, and now he's getting the care he needs. But what should we do now? Marcus asked. Eleanor had prepared for this question. Now we follow our family emergency plan. Do you remember what we wrote down for situations where someone is in the hospital? Marcus retrieved their emergency planning notebook and read through the relevant section. The plan included contact information for important people, arrangements for Marcus's care, and practical matters like meals and transportation. So my job is to follow my normal routine and let the adults handle the medical stuff? Marcus asked. Exactly, Eleanor confirmed. Your job is to keep doing well in school and your safety patrol duties. My job is to coordinate with the doctors and make sure Dad gets what he needs. Eleanor could see Marcus processing this information, and she was encouraged by how he was applying the lessons they had been learning together. But I want to help somehow, Marcus said. You can help, Eleanor assured him. You can help by being responsible and not creating additional worries for Dad while he recovers. And you can help by thinking of ways to make his recovery more comfortable. This concrete way to help seemed to ease Marcus's anxiety. Like what kind of things? Well, Eleanor said, he's going to be stuck in bed for a while. Maybe you could think of books he might like, or movies you could watch together, or projects you could work on while sitting with him. Marcus brightened at these suggestions. I could show him what I'm learning in the junior firefighter program. And maybe we could work on planning modifications to the truck that would make it easier for someone with a leg injury to use. Eleanor was pleased to see Marcus channeling his mechanical interests in a positive direction. Those sound like wonderful ways to help. That evening, Marcus surprised Eleanor by how well he handled the situation. Instead of lying awake worrying about worst-case scenarios, he made a list of things he could do to help his father during recovery. The next day at school, Marcus told Jessica about his father's accident during their safety patrol duty. That's scary, Jessica said sympathetically. Is he going to be okay? Yeah, Marcus replied. The doctors fixed his leg, and now he just needs time to heal. My grandma says it's a good example of how emergency systems work the way they're supposed to. Eleanor was proud to hear Marcus framing the situation positively when Mrs. Rodriguez relayed this conversation to her. When they visited David at the hospital that afternoon, Marcus approached the situation with remarkable maturity. Instead of being frightened by the medical equipment, he asked thoughtful questions about how everything worked. "The nurse showed me how the 4 delivers medicine automatically," Marcus reported to Eleanor. "She said it's designed to be very precise, so patients get exactly the right amount." David was clearly pleased to see Marcus handling the situation so well. "I was worried you'd be scared seeing me in here. I was worried at first," Marcus admitted. "But then I remembered what Captain Martinez taught us about emergency response. The system worked exactly like it's supposed to. Your coworkers called for help, the paramedics came fast, and now the doctors are fixing your leg." Eleanor could see David's relief at Marcus's mature perspective on the situation. Over the following days, Marcus established a routine for helping during his father's recovery. He visited the hospital every day after school, bringing homework to work on while sitting with David. He also brought books about automotive engineering that they could read together. "Look at this design for adaptive vehicle controls," Marcus said, showing David a diagram in one of his books. "They make modifications for people who have trouble using regular pedals." David was impressed by Marcus's research. "You've really been thinking about practical solutions." Captain Martinez says good emergency responders think about how to prevent problems and how to adapt when things don't work the usual way, Marcus explained. Eleanor noticed that Marcus was applying lessons from his junior firefighter program to their real-life situation. Instead of panicking or trying to take on adult responsibilities, he was finding age-appropriate ways to be helpful. When David came home from the hospital a week later, Marcus had prepared their house for his father's recovery. He had rearranged furniture to create clear pathways for David's crutches and had set up a comfortable area in the living room where David could rest while still participating in family activities. "This is really thoughtful, Marcus," David said, looking around at the preparations. "You've made this place much more comfortable for someone who can't move around easily." "I learned about accessibility planning in the junior firefighter program," Marcus explained. Captain Martinez says that emergency responders need to think about how to help people with different kinds of limitations. Eleanor was amazed by how Marcus had grown through this experience. Instead of being traumatized by his father's accident, he had used it as an opportunity to apply the skills and knowledge he had been learning. The first aid classes Eleanor had enrolled Marcus in proved particularly valuable during David's recovery. Marcus knew how to recognize signs that David might be in pain, and he understood the importance of taking medications on schedule. "Marcus has been a great help," David told Eleanor one evening. "He reminds me to do my physical therapy exercises, and he's good at noticing if I'm pushing myself too hard." Eleanor realized that Marcus had found exactly the kind of meaningful way to help that they had been looking for. He was using real skills to address a real situation, but within appropriate boundaries. 3 weeks after the accident, David was cleared to return to light duty at work. The family held a celebration dinner, and Eleanor was struck by how much their dynamics had improved. Marcus was more relaxed and confident. His helping behaviors were focused on concrete, immediate needs rather than hypothetical disasters. His relationship with David had strengthened through their shared recovery experience. Most importantly, Marcus had gained practical experience in how emergency situations actually unfold. He had seen that trained professionals handle the major aspects of emergencies, while family members provide emotional support and practical assistance within their capabilities. "I'm proud of how you handled everything while Dad was hurt," Eleanor told Marcus as they cleaned up after dinner. "I felt useful," Marcus replied. "Not like I was waiting to be useful someday, but actually useful right now." Eleanor hugged her grandson, grateful that they had successfully navigated their first real test of his new understanding about helping others safely and appropriately. 6 months after David's recovery, Eleanor received a phone call that she had never expected. Marcus's mother, Sarah, was calling from California to say that she wanted to visit. "I know it's been 2 years," Sarah said, her voice uncertain, "but I've been thinking about Marcus a lot lately. I'd like to come see him if that would be okay." Eleanor felt a mixture of emotions as she listened to Sarah's request. She was pleased that Sarah wanted to reconnect with Marcus, but worried about how this might affect the progress Marcus had made in managing his anxiety. "Of course you should come visit," Eleanor replied. "Marcus will be thrilled to see you. When were you thinking of coming?" "I could fly out next weekend if that works," Sarah said. "I have vacation time saved up, so I could stay for a week." After ending the call, Eleanor realized that Sarah's visit would be another test of how well Marcus could handle unexpected situations. The old Marcus might have spent days worrying about all the ways the visit could go wrong. The new Marcus, she hoped, would be able to enjoy his mother's company without taking on adult responsibilities for making everything perfect. When Marcus arrived home from school, Eleanor sat down with him to share the news. She watched his face carefully as she explained that his mother wanted to visit. Marcus's initial reaction was pure joy. "Really? Mom is coming to visit? When?" "Next weekend," Eleanor replied. "She'll stay for a week." Eleanor could see Marcus's mind working through the implications of this news, but she was relieved to see that his thought process seemed focused on positive aspects rather than potential problems. "Can I show her all the things I've learned?" Marcus asked. "Like the junior firefighter program and my safety patrol duties?" "I'm sure she'd love to hear about everything you've been doing," Eleanor assured him. "Should we plan special things to do while she's here?" Marcus continued. Eleanor was pleased that Marcus was thinking about making the visit enjoyable rather than worrying about preventing problems. "That's a great idea. What kinds of things do you think she'd like?" Marcus spent the next hour making lists of activities and places he wanted to share with his mother. He wanted to show her his school, introduce her to Captain Martinez at the fire station, and take her to see the truck he and David had been working on. That evening, David arrived home to find Marcus excitedly planning Sarah's visit. Eleanor explained the situation, and David handled the news with the same maturity that Marcus had shown. "It'll be good for Marcus to spend time with his mom," David said, "and it'll be good for Sarah to see how much he's grown." Over the following week, Marcus prepared for his mother's visit with the same systematic approach he brought to everything else, but without the anxiety that had previously characterized his planning. He cleaned his room, organized his photos from the junior firefighter program, and practiced explaining his safety patrol duties. "I want to show Mom that I'm learning to be helpful in good ways," Marcus told Eleanor. Eleanor was touched by this statement, which showed how much Marcus's self-concept had evolved over the past months. When Sarah arrived at the airport, Marcus greeted her with enthusiasm, but also with a new confidence that Eleanor hadn't seen before. He was genuinely excited to see his mother, but he wasn't trying to fix their relationship or solve adult problems. "You've gotten so tall," Sarah exclaimed as she hugged Marcus. "And you look so grown up." Marcus beamed at the compliment. "Wait until you see all the things I've learned. I'm on the safety patrol at school, and I'm in the junior firefighter program, and I know first aid now." Sarah looked surprised and pleased by Marcus's enthusiasm. "That sounds amazing. I can't wait to hear about everything." Over the next few days, Eleanor watched as Marcus showed his mother around his world. He took her to school and introduced her to Mrs. Rodriguez and Jessica. He brought her to the fire station and proudly demonstrated what he had learned in the junior firefighter program. Captain Martinez was particularly impressed by Marcus's presentation. "This young man has developed excellent emergency preparedness skills," he told Sarah. "But more importantly, he understands the proper role for civilians in emergency situations." Sarah seemed puzzled by this comment until Eleanor explained Marcus's previous obsession with driving and emergency scenarios. He was carrying a lot of anxiety about being prepared for disasters, Eleanor said. The junior firefighter program helped him understand that there are trained professionals who handle emergencies, and that his job is to know how to get help and stay safe. "I had no idea he was worrying about those things," Sarah said, looking concerned. "It started after you moved to California," Eleanor explained gently. "He was worried about not being able to help if something happened to people he cared about." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "He was worried about me being far away?" "Among other things," Eleanor confirmed. "But he's learned much healthier ways to channel his caring nature." That evening, Sarah had a long conversation with Marcus about his interests and activities. Eleanor was pleased to see that Marcus talked about his mother's move to California matter-of-factly, without the anxiety that had previously surrounded the topic. "Do you like living in California?" Marcus asked his mother. "Ido," Sarah replied honestly. "My job there's really good for me. But I miss spending time with you." "That's okay," Marcus said. "I understand that adults sometimes need to live in different places for their jobs. And now I know how to call you if I want to talk, and you know how to visit when you have time." Eleanor was amazed by Marcus's mature perspective on the situation. He had accepted the reality of his parents' divorce and his mother's geographic distance without taking responsibility for fixing those circumstances. "Would you like to see the truck, Dad, and I have been working on?" Marcus asked. In the garage, Marcus enthusiastically showed Sarah all the mechanical work he and David had completed. But Eleanor noticed that his explanations focused on understanding how systems worked rather than on emergency driving scenarios. "We learned how to change brake pads," Marcus explained. "And Dad taught me about how the electrical system connects everything together. Did you know that cars are basically computers on wheels now?" Sarah was impressed by Marcus's mechanical knowledge, but she was even more impressed by his balanced perspective. "You seem to really enjoy learning about how things work." "I do," Marcus confirmed. "Captain Martinez says that understanding systems is important for any kind of helpful work. Whether you're a firefighter or a mechanic or a doctor, you need to understand how things are supposed to work so you can tell when something is wrong." On Sarah's last day of visiting, the family had a barbecue in the backyard. Eleanor watched as Marcus interacted with both his parents, and she was struck by how comfortable and confident he seemed. Marcus wasn't trying to mediate between his parents or fix their relationship. He wasn't anxious about his mother leaving again. He was simply enjoying the time they had together while it lasted. "I want you to know," Sarah told Marcus as they were saying goodbye, "that I'm really proud of the young man you're becoming. You're thoughtful and caring, but you also seem very grounded and practical." "Thanks, Mom," Marcus replied. "I learned a lot about how to help people in good ways. And I learned that there are lots of different ways to help, so I don't have to worry about being ready for everything." After Sarah left, Eleanor reflected on how much their family had changed over the past year. Marcus had transformed from an anxious child carrying adult responsibilities to a confident young person with age-appropriate ways to be helpful and caring. David's injury had tested Marcus's new skills and understanding, and he had handled that situation remarkably well. Sarah's visit had tested his emotional resilience, and again, he had demonstrated healthy coping strategies. "I think we've successfully solved the driving problem," David said as they watched Marcus helping his friend from next door fix a bicycle chain. "More than that," Eleanor replied. "I think we've helped Marcus learn how to channel his caring nature in healthy directions." As they talked, Marcus finished helping with the bicycle and came over to join them on the porch. He settled into his favorite spot next to Eleanor, and she noticed that he seemed completely relaxed. "How are you feeling about Mom's visit?" Eleanor asked. "It was really good," Marcus replied. "I'm glad she got to see all the things I've learned, and I'm glad I got to spend time with her." "Are you sad that she had to go back to California?" David asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. "A little bit, but not the same way I used to be sad about it. I understand now that grown-ups have to make decisions about their lives, and kids don't have to fix those decisions." Eleanor smiled at this response, which perfectly captured the lessons Marcus had learned over the past year. "Plus," Marcus continued, "I have lots of good things happening here. I like my safety patrol duties and the junior firefighter program and learning about mechanics with Dad. I don't need everything to be perfect to be happy." As the evening grew darker, the three of them sat together on the porch, watching the neighborhood settle into nighttime routines. Eleanor felt a deep sense of contentment as she realized that Marcus had found his balance. He was still the same caring, thoughtful child he had always been, but now his desire to help others was channeled through appropriate activities and realistic expectations. He had learned to distinguish between problems that were his to solve and problems that belonged to trained adults. Most importantly, Marcus had learned that being helpful didn't require him to carry adult anxieties or prepare for every possible disaster. He could be genuinely useful right now, in age-appropriate ways, while still enjoying his childhood. "Grandma," Marcus said as they prepared to go inside, "thank you for helping me figure out better ways to help people." "Thank you for being willing to try new approaches," Eleanor replied. "You've taught me a lot about how caring and practical thinking can work together." As they turned off the porch lights and headed inside, Eleanor felt grateful that they had successfully navigated what had once seemed like an impossible situation. Marcus's obsession with driving had been transformed into a healthy interest in emergency preparedness and community service. The 9-year-old who had once spent hours practicing for disasters that might never come had become a confident young person actively contributing to his community's safety and well-being. And perhaps most importantly, he had learned that there were many different ways to help others starting right now.